Thank you. So welcome to this sixth and already last webinar in the series of Space Live Talks. This is an event that is co-organized by EBAN Space, so European Business Angel Networks, and NewSpace Capital. NewSpace Capital is a growth stage investment fund based in Luxembourg, really focused on space ecosystem. My name is Daniel Wiedemann. I spent most of my career in the space industry, mainly in the domains of launchers and the SATCOM sector. And I'm currently working as an independent advisor on space ecosystem topics, supporting, amongst other things, the development of NewSpace Capital, but also working on projects with the Luxembourg space agencies. So I'm very pleased to have with me in this webinar three distinguished guests, more from the world of entrepreneurship. And I think all of you are right in the middle of the action of what space entrepreneurship is concerned. And obviously that dwells well with the topic here today about the entrepreneur's view on COVID-19 crisis. What can be done to survive, and are there actually opportunities and benefits from all this? We had in previous sessions talked about the markets, we talked about the investors' view of things. Yesterday we had a perspective of the public sector. We also had a session on human spaceflight and science, which obviously was quite fascinating as well. So this time we want to focus really on entrepreneurs and entrepreneurship. And let me introduce the three speakers of today. So let me start with Elaine Scott, who just declared herself an imposter before. But I think you're right in the middle of the heat as well, Elaine. So Elaine heads up the northeast of England, a precise satellite application center of excellence, which is based at Net Park, the Region Science Park just out in the outskirts of Durham. The center, which is funded by the Satellite Applications Catapult and UK Space Agency, was created to stimulate and energize the space economy in the region, where there was actually little activity in this sector. So today she continues to help build useful connections, facilitate business solutions, and bring ideas to commercial exploitation. To this, Elaine and her team work with a wide network of businesses, support organizations, investors, funders, and academic institutions. So really right in the middle of it. So Elaine holds a BSc in Economy, Management, and Psychology from Durham University. And I was spying a little bit on you, Elaine. I also found out that you're quite passionate about car racing as well.
Oh dear.
So that's another domain of
yeah, that's another life.
So welcome, Elaine.
Thank you.
The second speaker calls in from Singapore. So thanks, David, for joining at the advanced hour on your side, so close to the weekend. So David Mitlyng is the Chief Operating Officer at SpeQtral, a quantum communication startup offering ultra-secure communications based on the laws of quantum physics. And I'll let you explain a little bit afterwards what that all means. David has 25 years of experience with huge space and communication, orbital ATK, SSL, and BridgeSat, and holds Bachelor in Aeronautical Engineering from Cal Poly Slough, a Master in Aeronautics and Astronautics from Stanford, and an MBA from MIT Sloan School of Management. So welcome, David, for joining this webinar.
Yeah.
And then last but not least, I would like to introduce our speaker from Luxembourg, Omar Qaise. Omar is the founder and CEO of OQ Technology, a new space startup which is aiming to disrupt the satellite communication world by building a global satellite constellation dedicated for 5G and cellular IoT. Omar brings a wealth of experience to this venture, working many organizations like ESA, DLR, OGB, OHB, UMETSAT. The list is very long, Omar. And most recently with SES, where you served as a responsible for sales and business development in regions like Middle East and Africa. Omar holds a BSc in Electric and Electronic Engineering from Narayan University, a Master of Science in Information Technology from Bremen University in Germany, and an MBA from Glasgow Strathclyde University. So thanks for joining, Omar, and welcome.
Thank you, Daniel.
So, last thing on intros, please maybe all participants except the speakers obviously switch off their cameras and put your microphones on mute so that we can avoid background noises. Emanuele already posted on the chat line that if you have questions, please write them here in the chat line, and I will try to make sure that we address most of them during this 1-hour webinar. So let's get started with a couple of introductory questions, and maybe I start with David. So maybe you can give us a little bit of overview of what SpeQtral is and what you do, and then maybe give a little bit of a 360 of how you weather the current situation, what are the challenges and how do you see opportunities, what has changed, and how do your stakeholders around you actually react to all this? I mean, you know, there might be positive and negatives out of this, but maybe you can give us a bit of a 360 on this.
No, well, first of all, I'm happy to be invited here and have the opportunity to join this webinar. Definitely, we are in interesting times, so I'll try to give a little bit of insight from our perspective on what we see is happening and what we think is going to happen. Yeah, so SpeQtral, it was a good introduction. We're a startup that was formed and funded a bit over a year ago around commercializing quantum communications. And I'm sure for the wider audience, this is a relatively new technology, relatively new for the industry. Quantum communications is actually a technology that is sounds new, but it's been around in development for a couple decades in academic environment. One of the leaders in the world in the development of quantum communications has actually been the Center for Quantum Technologies, and our company is a spin out from CQT. So we are one of the only groups in the world that has actually launched a quantum communication system. It's on orbit right now on a 3U CubeSat. That's the latest version. And then there's quantum communications is actually for the layman very similar to optical communications. The key difference is we kind of turn down the power on the laser, and we manipulate the quantum properties of individual photons or particles of light. And that quantum properties of the photons is what encodes the bits, the zeros and ones, and creates a very secure communication link. That communication link can be used for a number of applications, the most famous of which is quantum key distribution, QKD, the secure distribution of encryption keys. So, our company, our team, they've been developing this, like I said, over the last decade and a half, primarily at CQT. We saw that the time was right to spin out a startup around commercializing this technology. And we were formed and funded, like I said, a bit over a year ago, initial seed funding led by Space Capital, the Space Angels, SG Innovate, Shasta Ventures, a few others, Golden Gate Ventures. And so it's been, for us, it's been an interesting year. It's been a year of kind of breakneck growth. Of course, now we're in new and interesting times, and time will tell how that's going to impact our business. But I think for us, we're fortunate because we do have a relatively unique technology, relatively advanced technology. There's still a lot of market interest in this technology and the system that we have. and we have a bit of that leader position. So for us, we have some plans to get through this and come out the other side even stronger than before. But time will tell.
Okay. Maybe you can talk a little bit about your plans a little later, but maybe let's move on to Omar, and maybe Omar, you can give us a similar perspective. So I think introduce a little bit what you're doing and what your ambitions are and how the whole situation has affected you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Daniel. So LQ Technology is a NewSpace startup that started in Luxembourg 3.5 years ago and currently expanding also to other countries with the aim really to expand the footprint of cellular connectivity and providing access to precious data of Internet of Things and machine-to-machine communication in remote and rural area, which is more than 75% of the world, using very low-cost scheme by exploiting low-cost nano satellites, and also a highly scalable model of using softwares that could be deployed on software-defined radio payloads, and this way, for the first time, enabling mobile operators to reach their users or roam with them directly through satellites everywhere in the world, but also for enterprise companies that have operations in remote and rural areas and looking for narrowband communication for much lower cost than traditional satellite communication. So we have 2 patents. We have a lot of work that has been done before regarding really how to make cellular terrestrial technology work on small satellites. And we're making a lot of progress in this. We're on the way of launching our first satellites. And we have been also largely supported by the government. And hopefully soon we will be able to show that to our potential customers, whether it's mobile operators or energy and logistic enterprises. Regarding the question of the effect of the pandemic, that may sound a little bit odd if we say that we're lucky that this thing it came a little bit with some advantage to us, because we're using this time to perfect our technology and setup in order to be ready for market access later and to catch up with our competition. So in some perspective, companies who were already starting to do their business operations may have been affected a lot. We actually use this time in order to fill the holes and perfect our technology in order to be able to catch up and with the others and provide our service. So that's one of the things, and luckily also because most of our projects are with the European Space Agency and government, so it kind of also helped us to continue our work. We're actually back to office 80% since last week, and continuing our operations.
Okay. Well, as the title says, Omar, it could be obviously impact, but it can also be benefits. And so I think what you're saying is it's probably more beneficial. Maybe just before I go to Elaine, David, there was one question on the chat line already for you. So the question is, from Jay is, what type of customers would use your type of technology?
Yeah, that's a good question. Quantum communications, particularly QKD, is underpinning secure communication networks. So it's relatively anybody who needs secure communications. The obvious low-hanging fruit for us in the near term is government agencies, and we already have a bit of traction with a number of government agencies, both in the US, Asia, and a little bit in the UK. But we're also kind of focused on the long-term commercial market. Again, security and cybersecurity is a concern that is not going away, COVID-19 or not. So we do have a bit of commercial traction also. And we're focused on developing a space-based QKD system primarily for the commercial market. Again, and then even in the commercial market, it's segmented a bit. Telcos, financial institutions, banks, pretty much anybody who really relies on security for their communications.
Okay. And do they need to install something specific on their side, or how does that work?
Yeah, so our kit is, similar to an optical telescope, but, we're working to shrink that down. But the idea being that, it'd have to be kind of installed on individual buildings where they would want to have the links, the secure nodes for their network. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, technology is relatively advanced, I guess, but it's not quite at the price point or size of VSAT terminal, but it's going to get there soon.
Okay. Okay. Good. So let's move to Elaine. Maybe sort of, I think you're sort of like in the middle of many actors, and I think what would be interesting for the audience to hear from you, Elaine, is a bit sort of, first of all, what you're doing and how your community is weathering the situation, and maybe how has your work changed? Is there anything different before and now, and how do you expect that to sort of go into the future?
Okay, thank you, Daniel. I think what might be useful for the audience is to just really paint you a very brief picture of the region, because that's what I'm representing today. I don't represent the UK, so we're a small part of it. So the northeast of England is roughly of a population of about 2.7 million. It's about 8,500 kilometers square space. There's a lot of rural areas. And just to inform you, I appreciate we have an audience from across continents. So you might have heard of cities such as Newcastle upon Tyne. So, the football fans amongst you will be aware of that. And Sunderland and Middlesbrough, and of course, Durham, which is where our science park is based. Again, those who have been following the political news on COVID-19, Durham has been in the news a lot in the last few days to do with Dominic Cummings, but we won't go into that. So the history, the heritage from economic terms for Durham, also for the Northeast, is that we're very strong in engineering and manufacturing. But in terms of new economy, digital is pretty strong, as is healthcare and life sciences. We also have a pretty strong automotive, construction, and process industry. So that gives you a rough idea in terms of the profile of the region. Now, the North Application Centre of Excellence, which I represent, we've been around for about 6 years now. We are funded by the UK Space Agency and the Satellite Applications Catapult, which is based in Harwell. So we were set up, we were first of 3 centres that were set up to stimulate and energise the space sector in the region. And in the early years, focus was very much around downstream. So we're talking to an informed audience here, so you know what that means. But in the last couple of years, a lot of our activities has really been around the upstream side of things as well, particularly to reflect the global opportunities that's presented itself. So the types of companies that I work with is really quite broad ranging, from startups right up to very well established companies. Now, in terms of what I regard as pure play space companies in the region, we probably don't have quite as many as some of the other regions, but we're talking about space economy. So a lot of the companies that we work with service multiple sectors. So I just wonder, just to reflect or share with you the mood of the region in terms of space. I would say it's pretty resilient, I think, for that reason, or partly the reason. And also that I think, colleagues here would probably share the idea that, it's a long game business. So, I think generally it's the mood is pretty fairly buoyant, particularly when a lot of the businesses are in a communication sector. But clearly, there are some very small, early starts, early stages business. It's all to do with timing and when they were all set up and where they are in terms of the fundraise. But I think it's true to say that generally, they are pretty upbeat or positive. Let's not go too far and think pretty positive in the future. But in the short term, it's like any business. It's really about cash flow. So, there are lots of initiatives, local government, national government, and also, with the help of ESA and UK Space Agency, all of that contribute towards helping, businesses in the short term to survive. I would also like to draw your attention to, if you're not already aware, in the UK Space Agency and UK Space, which is the trade association for the space sector, have been running a survey since March. You can access this on the internet, on the web. They've been assessing how COVID-19 is impacting businesses generally, and they run this fortnightly. I had a quick look before the event today, and again, I think the sector is holding up pretty well, generally speaking. So that's good news.
Yeah, that's good news, and I think already in previous session we got, I think, the overall impression that we're talking more about a speed bump than a structural problem in the space sector, and that the recovery obviously will come sooner or later. And I think that's maybe an interesting question to the audience. Maybe I let Omar answer that first. I think there's good resilience in overall in the sector. It comes from different areas of support, be it from governments and funding opportunities from private investors, but also from the substance of the business itself, because there's a need for it. But at the same time, I think there is also, over the last couple of years, a little bit of a hype that new space is the new fashion, and money is flowing into the sector. And I think when you read and you dig a little bit deeper, it seems, first of all, undiscriminatory in terms of good and bad, and also biased towards the big logos, the big names. So, is that, in your view, will that help to distinguish between the real companies that are worth investing and the zombies that actually are just soaking blood from others and actually shouldn't be there in the first place because their business model is not sound or their technology is not sound? So Omar, your view, and how can you benefit from that to sort of basically stand out from this?
Yeah, that's actually true, Daniel. What we see is that, in general, there will be more what we can call it a market correction, is that valuations are going to be lower right now. Investors are more going to scrutinize business plan, revenues, potential customers, and before really investing into startups, which could be also, as you said, a benefit for some companies who have been trying to show like there are real business cases with a lot of potential, rather than just the money flowing into overvalued companies are being focused into only one sector. We see this already, like with the small satellite launcher sector, that there is a very big kind of Darwin effect taking place there, and which could be a good thing for the industry in general, but also with things going into, with the availability of more funding for other sectors. So that's on one side, but of course the challenge is because in general right now investors are more trying to focus on their own portfolios and before really taking risk investing in new companies. There will be also this kind of when the pandemic ends, and by year end or beginning of next year, when investors are open again to invest, there will be a surge of companies and startups towards getting this funding, a kind of backlog, as you can tell, which will be also a challenge for some startups. So hopefully investors will be looking into the full spectrum. That's on one side. So, but also on the other side, you have investors who are still, looking to invest into deep tech and risky ventures, especially like funds which they have a mandate to, to find these startups and invest in them within their lifetime. So that also brings some positive sense into the picture. So I think the main thing will be for startups who believe they have like a good business case is that to survive this period as much as possible, to be very conscious with cash and spending, and really get into the picture with a very solid model of for their business, for their revenues, and what they can bring. And I'm sure that there will be very, more distinguished and survive compared to the others.
Thank you, Omar. David, maybe your perspective on this.
Yeah, so I mean, that's a good analogy. A good way to state it is to say, what is the impact it's going to have on these so-called zombies. And it's something that we've been hearing for the last couple of years, actually. If you go to any space conference, if there's an investor panel, there's always that, the first question of the moderator is always, okay, when's the shakeup going to occur? There's too many of these kind of space startups. There's too many, broadband satellite constellations. There's too many launch vehicle or satellite manufacturer type things. Whether COVID-19 accelerates that or not, I mean, I think it's definitely destined to make everybody sharpen their pencil a little bit and really focus on the business model and the business case. So I do think the shakeout was destined to occur sooner or later. We all knew that. It was just fundamentally too many competing companies or competing types of startups going in certain sectors. So the upside of that is that's good. It's good to kind of refocus toward some of the core companies that have always had very good business models, good business plans, good tech that can, provide, get to the company at the point where they're cash flow positive sooner. So in my mind, nothing's fundamentally changed there. And one of the things worth kind of recognizing too is even in these times where there's bound to be some retrenchment of investment money and just the economy in general, space investment takes a long time. Space companies take a while before they become successful and cash flow positive. And everybody understands that. They understood that 5 years ago and they understand that today. So the path for these companies is, kind of for the investors and those companies is just make sure that they have the plans and backup plans in place so they can, like you said, get through this storm and weather it, come out the other side even stronger.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Elaine, I would like to sort of get your perspective as well, but I would like to include immediately a question that came from the audience from EBAN. and he says, not including North America, do you see any particular world regions recovering quicker than others in terms of the startup landscape? So are there structural means in place that would favor one region than the other? But maybe you can combine that with this overall question about, you know, does COVID basically clean up the space in a way, or does it accelerate that action?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Dave and Omar. It's, you know, it's not necessarily a bad thing in that if there's a positive in all of this, you know, it helps to shake out, you know, the phrase here that we use of wheats from the chaff. But again, luckily for us in the region, I can only speak from a region point of view. The companies that we're working with, you know, they have, you know, inherently important, critical, game-changing technologies, and luckily, you know, that they are well on the journey in terms of fundraising. So what it means from an investment point of view is it's in their investors' interest to continue supporting them because, you know, they're in their portfolio and they have very solid business models. However, in terms of startups, it'd be an interesting picture because, you know, whilst, you know, we have investors that are going to be looking for new opportunities, but again, another phrase that we have here is battening down the hatches. They're going to be much more, there's going to be a lot more scrutiny, as you said, in terms of looking at opportunities. And with the impact that's going to have in industry, we might have some new entrants. And one thing I didn't mention earlier, Daniel, you did mention about the very broad stakeholders that I work with, and that's universities. So certainly in the UK, you know, it's going to impact university quite significantly. But also in terms of our startup scene in the Northeast, you know, we are reliant on you know, university spin-outs. So that will be an interesting picture to see in the coming months and see how that plays out in terms of investment, because it can work both ways. But at the end of the day, if you have a solid, you know, idea, solid innovation, it will get funded. And particularly in a space sector, we're largely talking about patient capital. So I'm broadly quite optimistic about that. But in terms of the question from the audience, I can't really say for sure. I don't really have a particular view, you know, whether there's one region that is, you know, faring better than another. But at the moment, I think it's still a bit too early days to see, certainly for our region.
Right. David, any perspective on that? Do you think any region will do better than another one?
You know, there's been a boom of startups in space startups, obviously in the US, Europe, and you see very strong pockets of that in Asia, particularly China, Japan, and Singapore. I ran a panel last year at APSCC, which was the leading Asia Pacific satellite conference, where we had a NewSpace competition and a NewSpace panel. I mean, there's great ideas coming out from all three of those corners of the world. Definitely, I think the US side of things is very dynamic, and I think all those sectors could do well, particularly the sectors that have government support behind them. I think space startups in particular, if things get very rocky, you know, government-funded projects are this good safe harbor for a lot of these space startups. And so there could be some regional differences based off of kind of how governments step up and provide government funding, and their willingness to provide funding for space startups. So it's but all three areas I think are fairly strong right now.
Right.
Should have some good winners emerging from them.
Right. Okay. Maybe I start with a new question coming from the audience. Fadi Nafa asked to all the panelists, but maybe I start with Omar on this one. So do you expect the VCs, if I understand the question correctly, Fadi, but correct me if I'm wrong. The question is sort of, so what sort of key performance indicators will VCs apply now in the future compared to maybe in the past, where I think we were more in a hype or bubble situation where almost anything was good? So what are the new KPIs that they would apply to actually make an investment decision?
Yeah, I think, as I said, like you can already see this with VCs trying more now to focus towards companies that probably already have some revenues in their books, or companies that have a high value with respect to IP and technology, or commitment from customers, a footprint, a global footprint. Even if they are a startup, but such aspects should be all taken into account into the KPI, and also the growth rate for more advanced startups. So for sure, there will be this mindset and change in VC's way of investing in companies, not to repeat the mistakes of the past, and also the demand on the management for revenue generation and growth. I strongly see this will be more clear. What might also come is that probably new models of funding that can come up in order to hedge against such a situation. I can't really predict exactly what that will be, but it would be really unusual if VCs continue the same way to value or to provide the same funding instruments will still be the same for space companies. Probably more involvement from government, but more on a focused business perspective. Time just will tell how that will pan out. But I'm sure about that won't be the same anymore.
Yeah. Do you see depressed valuations as a result of that?
Yeah, definitely. There's currently so this is actually the double sided thing, that there is a lower valuation for space companies right now, which might not be good for startups to take funding currently. So it's my advice is to wait a little bit until the market recovers. So in general, yeah, that's what we will be seeing, and then to regain value, and it will take really some solid business plan and commitment from customers, and in order to be able to reserve your value.
Okay, Elaine, anything you would like to add? What Omar just said?
No, not really. I don't. I think it's it's fairly well shared in that view. One thing I would actually add as well, not so much in terms of the VC world, investment world. What I'm seeing in the region is, as I've explained earlier, we do have some quite well established companies, and what I'm seeing is the companies are fortunate enough to have enough reserves to invest. In fact, I was talking to a couple of companies who are thinking of spinning off from their existing companies to set up, dedicated space, businesses, as it were. But that's from their own reserves. So that's an interesting
Right.
observation.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Now, we talked a little bit about the involvement of government. David, you mentioned the safe harbor for a number of startups that, government-funded projects would obviously help. And we had yesterday an interesting panel from the public sector with the 3 space agency presence. And I see Talal is actually also listening today welcome Talal. One question or one point that was discussed yesterday and also in previous sessions was sort of the role government should take to avoid that it becomes a free for all, everybody just go and collect money, and again procrastinating a little bit the zombie behavior. But it was also in one session I was in when we talked about the market, about the right balance between the commercial sector and the government sector, and making sure that the government sector doesn't eat into what should be a competitive environment by nature. So, I mean, maybe David, if I could ask you first to comment on how you see the role sharing between the private and the public sector and the private and the public investors in all this, and which role each of them should take.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Definitely getting a lot of interesting discussion lately, and I missed that panel yesterday. I'm sorry, I missed it actually. You know, I think any good startup, any good space startup, you want to have a mix of customers in your pipeline, both business, both commercial, as well as government, both defense and civil agencies, and have a product or a service, a system that you can offer that makes sense for all of them. You know, for us as a company, we're focused on the long-term commercial market and developing that, but the near-term government opportunities have been very good for us. We've got a number of government contracts in Asia as well as in the US. We have what they call small business innovation research grants at our US company. So sponsored by the Air Force and other groups. And they've been very good about providing funding, but they're not giving the money away. It's their competitive proposal process. You still got to apply, and you still got to prove that you meet their needs, their stakeholder needs. So maybe with the COVID-19 things, with the situation, some of these government agencies will try to step up a little bit to help protect companies. Frankly, I have not seen that. I don't know if that's going to be the case. I think it's more a case, and we hear this from senior officials with a number of defense and government agencies, including Will Roper with the Air Force, that they want to make sure that small, agile space startups don't get, you know, cut off or blocked off by the big defense primes. You know, and I'm sure it's the same with the European Space Agency and then these other groups too, that you know, the large guys are going to come in there and, you know, say, hey, we need help too, but the help they need is in hundreds of millions and billions of dollars, where I think those defense agencies in particular are saying, no, we're going to keep this allocated piece for the small guys because they tend to have more interesting technology, they can be more agile, they can move quicker. So that's very encouraging to hear, even in this environment.
Yeah, that's indeed very interesting, and that's indeed a worry that was expressed before as well, that with all the lobbying power that these big guys have, that there's a risk that, you know, they get disproportionately more actually than the small guys, and they're left behind. Elaine, maybe can you give us your perspective on that very question about the right balance between public and private sector, and what's important in there?
Yeah, I think for sure there needs to be, you know, a balance between the two. In terms of the companies, you know, for us, our companies here and in the UK, they have been looking at some of the national COVID-19 support for innovative businesses that are available. The key ones, one is a £1.25 billion coronavirus fund, I know some of our businesses are trying to access that one, and that is split into two main pots, one of which will impact or hopefully support companies that have investments from venture capital funds and angel funders, and that is a fund that would match at 50% funding for businesses that have investment already. So that's going to support a lot of high growth businesses, which some of our space companies fall under. And the other one is the Innovate UK Fund. Again, some of the businesses that we have already access that fund. So Innovate UK grants are grants that, this is not just space, obviously, it's across all different innovative businesses that are producing game-changing technologies. The way it normally works is companies would receive 60 to 70% grant towards the project. So what this fund enables them to do is to plug in the match fund which companies would otherwise need to raise themselves. And some of these match funds would typically come from investment or from revenues that they have. So these are the kind of public sector funds that our businesses in the region are currently right now working on to try and help manage through the situation and to survive. But on a bigger scale, I know that the European Space Agency, UK Space Agency, are trying to bring forward, payments, etc. And these little things do help companies to get over the bump, speed bump, as you put it. So that's really useful. The other point, which would be interesting to see whether how it plays out for the smaller companies. Last week, I was listening to an interview with the CEO of ADS. So ADS is an aerospace and defense organization, representative organization in the UK. And it was really an interview in response to the announcement from Rolls-Royce laying off 9,000 staff globally. And of course, we have quite a presence in the UK in terms of Rolls-Royce. And the question to the CEO was, so what are you looking for? Are you asking, government to provide a lot more funding, grant funding? And interestingly, the response was, well, no, not necessarily. Because what they foresee is, it's going to affect the aerospace sector, minimum 3 to 5 years. So they know that the market for the aerospace is going to be, hampered quite significantly. However, what they're asking government to do is potentially to bring forward contracts for defense and space. So, something that, they might be commissioning in, I don't know, 3 years or a little bit to bring that forward. So if you look at ADS, they're representing the large primes. So it'd be interesting, as I say, how that would trickle or might impact or support smaller startups.
Right. So what you're basically saying is companies prefer to have governments as a customer rather than just a grant provider. And with this solidify also their revenue build up, and with this also basically allowing to sort of promote what they're doing to other sectors, right?
Yeah, and that's a role that government can play.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, that's very interesting. And there was one other point that I heard yesterday in the public panel, and maybe Omar, you can comment on that. In relation to the role of governments. I mean, government as a customer, I think, keeps coming back. Government as a de-risker keeps coming back. But it was also an interesting aspect that was brought up yesterday is government as the facilitator to cross-feed between different industries and different sectors. And I think one phenomena that we see is that space is not in isolation. Space is something that enables other sectors and other industries, but very often other industries and other sectors don't know about that. They don't know that space could actually help them. So what's your experience there? Has there been any of these actions and activities that you have seen to make sure there is a sort of a, I can call it cross-fertilization for a better word?
So we have seen this, yes. It's not with all governments. With some governments, yes, especially if you realize that what you are trying to offer may serve another sector or another industry, or let's say a prominent player or customer in a country that you could governments can play a role to really facilitate, make the introduction, or even lay down the setup that can allow such an interaction. And so it depends. It's different. But in general, I think for it's a responsibility first on space agencies and governments themselves to be well aware of the different sectors and different verticals in their country, and the different support programs that they can then let their space companies make a benefit of. But also it's a responsibility of the startup itself to project themselves not just as a voodoo space science fiction type of company, which is always the problem, but really like, you're a data company or a telecom company or your like imaging company that gives some value to these other sectors. Then they can understand that and see how they can talk and benefit from it. So it's a responsibility on both sides. But then talking exactly and commenting on before what my colleague said, with this time, this is exactly actually so the right time where governments could play a role to help small startups in surviving the storm by supporting them, by being more agile and quick in their processes and reacting to that. And we see this also taking place. This is, I think, the time where a large responsibility lies on space agencies and governments.
Okay, thank you very much. I just looking at my watch and I see we're almost reached the top of the hour. So what I will do is maybe just very quickly wrap up the discussion and then give each of our speakers an opportunity for maybe a 1 minute final last words. So let me just sort of, I think generally the mood I read is positive. I think there's still a lot of opportunities, and COVID, may have an impact in the short term, but that can be weathered through good cost cash management and good best practice. And then I think most of all of us will come out stronger, but it will have an impact on what I before called zombie companies. So I think there will be a shake-up in the industry, and only the quality will survive. The quantity will probably disappear, which will, I think, probably put a new landscape also for both startups and investors, because first of all, there will be less companies, but there probably will be better, but there will be more scrutiny applied to the investments that are being made. Then we had a very good discussion about the role of the government, both as a customer, as a partner, and as helping out during the difficult times. So I think this was a very good 360 view of the world of entrepreneurs. So thank you very much to all the speakers. And maybe I give Elaine the floor, ladies first, to sort of give your last comments before we close.
Sorry, Daniel. I missed you the last 5-10 seconds.
Yeah, I was just giving the floor to you to have your last closing.
That was what I was afraid of. I wasn't sure because you froze. Okay, yeah, just summing up. You summed it up really nicely, Daniel. I think at the end of the day, the big macro drivers are not going to go away. We are in an indirect way, we are funded by the government, so the government has has a role to play and will continue to do that. We have a catalyst role because a lot of what I've said earlier, we're here to stimulate the space economy market, so we'll continue to work on that to grow that. And as I said, the macro drivers like change and healthcare and all that, space underpins a lot of this. The requirement for fast, reliable delivery of data, space has a big role in that. And we're all now Zooming and Skyping and so on. So,
yep.
That need is going to be greater. So long term, these are the things that are going to keep us going, and it's going to support the sector going forward. As you say, we are optimistic, I would say.
Thank you, Lynn. David.
Well, first of all, just thank you, Daniel, for the invitation to come here. It's fun for us to sit here and look in the crystal ball and try to predict where things are going to go. V shape, W shape, L shape, we don't know where things are going to go. But I do think that there's, whether it's a speed bump or total retrenching or shakeout, one of the things I've seen in kind of my career is just there have been crashes before. The dot-com bust, September 11th, 2008. These things come and go, but space is proven to be a reliable long-term business, a very strong long-term business. You look at what SpaceX is doing, the people tuning in to watch a launch this weekend. You look at space tourism, just Earth observation, a ton of new business opportunities that are being developed with space companies and new space companies. I think that's a remarkable trend that's going to continue. And we hold this same panel May 29th, 2021. I think we'll look back in the rearview mirror and say, overall, the new space sector is still very strong.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you, David. I would agree with that. Thank you, Omar.
Yes. Stay positive, stay optimistic. We're gonna pass by. And for entrepreneurs, really, despite everything, if you have the right motivation, right vision, you're gonna survive this crisis. And this actually what makes the journey more interesting. And look also at the positive sides, this time is really good to work on rethinking business models, business plan, pivoting, or using best practices for managing your startup. And I'm sure, as David said, next year will come and say, yeah, the space sector and new space sector are still alive.
Very good. Thanks, Omar. So with this, I would like to thank, first of all speakers for their contribution and the interesting discussion we had. I would also like to thank the audience for joining and participating in the questions. Then last but not least, many thanks to Emanuele and Veronica for organizing this and the support we got from NewSpace Capital and EBAN Space. So thanks very much. And that closes the Space Life Week for this time. I hope we can repeat that maybe in a couple of months from now and have another version of this. So thanks very much and bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.